usually I'm in a lot of metaverse groups about usually around millennials. So the conversation around the millennials, of course, is more progressive and it's better around that space. The issue is really healthcare. Is our America's healthcare system about paying and about availability? And right
Mm.
now, the black therapist is like the new rock star. It's a, y'all are about to pop and be like super popular. And so my counselor, he's booked and busy like he's an Instagram model or a rapper. Sometimes when we're on our session, I can see him writing things down and trying to probably he's probably compartmentalizing, and which is fine. He does an amazing job. Um, but yeah, that's the only thing about healthcare availability and price with the healthcare. Now in the larger groups with some of the where I'm mixed in with Gen Xers and Boomers, I've seen and heard some crazy things. I mean, I've heard people say it's cliche, but I've heard the quintessential I got God, I got Jesus. I've seen and heard it's not what is it gonna do just to talk to someone.
Hmm.
I've seen and heard what is that gonna do for me? Does it really work? um and everything to hmm, I don't know, simple deflection, simple like I don't need it. That's the biggest thing for me.
Okay.
Someone saying like it's like the mirror thing, like no one self accountability. Someone's saying like, well, what would I need therapy for? And then there's the knee jerk reaction of, what do you mean? And I'm a so happenstance. Like I work in the tech industry, so I'm not like Elon Musk. I'm not pretty robotic and like extraterrestrial in the tech sense. I'm very humanoid, fluid, empathetic, sympathetic. But sometimes things have to be logical for me and make sense. How
Mm.
could you, as a person, think that you have everything figured out? Like you being an organic organism and you thinking that you either may not need to talk to somebody or you need help. Are you really like, and I don't want to go into the religious aspect, but
You don't have
you
to.
can have Jesus and a therapist. You do know it's possible. Like Jesus is not a real person and he doesn't charge you. So it's gonna cost more to have Jesus and a therapist. So why that doesn't occur to older generations, nothing personal. I'm just that's just never clicked with me. But overall, I would say with like we said before, post George Floyd, it's
Mhm.
a little more positive. Of course, us as black people are talking about it more. And it's a little more of an open conversation.
That's good. That's good to hear, man. And I agree with some of the points that you mentioned too. Like I said earlier, religious and faith leaders is usually, in my experience growing up, I grew up in, just for the sake of the example, I grew up in Latino churches and I grew up in black churches. And for my experience, most of the time we go to the faith leader if we have an issue, whether it's relational with like your spouse or your partner, or even dealing with your children. You go to church. So, which again, we're not at all trying to discriminate and saying like you shouldn't engage in that if that's your process. But I want to emphasize the last point you just made, Isaiah. Why couldn't we have two? And to further emphasize what you said, that because you brought me back to the point I was trying to make earlier about baking in room, as I would say, to be wrong. Because we have to always remember that we have a very strong implicit bias, right? That's my worldview. That's my egocentric worldview. I like minored in anthropology. So I remember when I started learning that stuff, I was like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. You see things from your perspective. It's really hard to convince you or me or anybody to deem it otherwise. But even if you give it like a 0.1% or 1% chance that you could be wrong, you're more likely to be open to hearing other people's thoughts and maybe entertaining the fact that it could be something other than the way that you see it. But it's very hard because you have to have a lot of awareness and you have to really consciously focus on that. But to your point, though, if I'm aware enough and I'm putting in that effort and I'm maybe going and seeking out doing my therapy, it will be easier for me over time to refine that skill. But I'm hopeful that because so many of us are starting to, let's say, positively associate engaging in therapy, no longer, I don't know if you guys would say this, but maybe no longer only hearing like, oh, you're crazy as the knee jerk reaction when you say therapy. It's like, oh. You talk to somebody, you got some stuff going on, good for you. Like I would hope for that becomes the way our responses are in general. Not you're flawed, you're broken, it's always going to be like that. Again, the other deflections you mentioned, what is it going to benefit? Talking to them ain't going to fix anything. Well, number one, we don't fix you. Number one, you help fix yourself. We help you. We, as Travis said, we're along for the ride. We're a guide. We can be an advisor. We are there to try to understand your perspective. Again, the bias is strong. I need to understand what your bias tells you about the world that you encounter every day. But you got to be willing to give some breathing room to consider an alternative viewpoint.